It was the kind of cold that made every sound brittle. A mid-December stillness blanketed the town of Stillwater, Wisconsin, where the river turned to glass and the woods stood motionless under sheets of white. For locals, the Winter River Festival wasn't just a holiday tradition, it was a heartbeat. Every year, families gathered on the frozen Stillwater River to celebrate what winter gave them. Music, hot cider, bonfires crackling on the banks, and that one perfect stretch of thick, polished ice that ran nearly a mile downstream. For the Taylor family, it had been tradition since Hannah could walk and Nolan could wobble. Now, 14 and 10, the siblings were old enough to skate without supervision, trusted enough to follow the rules. They left home just after lunch that Saturday, bundled in layers, skates over their shoulders. Cheeks already pink from excitement, their mom, Marcy, watched them go with a smile. She remembered them smaller, arms outstretched, laughing as they slipped and clung to the rails. This time, she didn't follow. She didn't think she needed to. The first few hours passed like they always did. Music echoing faintly from the speakers, kids racing in zigzags across the ice, teenagers sharing cocoa near the fire barrels. By 3 p.m., the sun had started its slow descent, casting long blue shadows over the snowbanks. Vendors packed up early. The river, still buzzing with families, began to thin out. Hannah had always been responsible, a quiet girl with a protective streak. Nolan, curious but cautious, usually stuck by her side. They weren't the kind to wander far. By 4:30, temperatures dropped sharply. The River Festival's organizers began clearing people off the ice. Visibility worsened. By 5:15, the last families were making their way home. No one could say exactly when Hannah and Nolan disappeared. Marcy assumed they'd stopped to help a friend pack up or were walking the long way home. She texted Hannah once. No response. She called Nolan. Voicemail. The silence felt off but not yet terrifying. By 6:10, she drove the loop around the river bend, scanning the sidewalks. No sign of them. By 6:30, she was knocking on neighbors' doors. No one had seen them. No one remembered them leaving. At 7:04 p.m., she called 911. Her voice cracked. Something wasn't right. She knew it. A dispatcher logged it as a possible delayed return, maybe a miscommunication. The assumption was simple. Maybe they'd gone to a friend's house. Maybe they were waiting at a warming hut and hadn't noticed the time. But as the minutes passed, something shifted in tone. By 8:00, patrol cars circled the river and its trails. Flashlights swept through trees. And by 10:15 p.m., Stillwater officially had 2 missing children. What chilled first responders wasn't just the bitter cold, it was the clarity of the facts. The river had been full of people. Broad daylight, dozens of witnesses, music playing, vendors packing up. And yet, no one remembered seeing Hannah and Nolan after 4 Sioux. Their phones had last pinged on the southeast side of the river just after 4:17. Then, nothing. No calls, no texts, as if the signal just died. Investigators tracked the cell towers. Both phones disconnected from the network at almost the same moment. That fact, 2 devices, 2 children, 1 sudden silence, set off internal alarms. Stillwater PD requested drone teams from neighboring counties. They pulled up satellite imaging. They scoured the river with snowmobiles and floodlights. The first night yielded nothing. No footprints leading into the woods, no skates abandoned by the ice, no clothing, no scream, no struggle. The only thing left behind was the silence. By morning, the town had changed. Posters went up, school alerts were issued. The Taylor house, once filled with warmth and noise, turned into a base of operations for detectives and grief counselors. Volunteers lined the roads in fluorescent vests, walking grid searches through the fields and tree lines. The river had frozen solid weeks earlier, its thickness measured and cleared by the festival committee. Officials were confident it wasn't weak enough to give way. Besides, no hole had been found, no signs of recent cracks or water exposure. Some suggested the kids may have wandered toward the tree line and gotten lost. Others believed the phone simply froze in the cold. But that didn't explain the missing skates. It didn't explain how 2 children, wearing heavy coats and bright scarves, could vanish without being seen by a single person. Rumors surfaced, as they always do. An old man recalled seeing a van parked along the trail that hadn't been there the day before. A vendor remembered a man standing alone by the south bend, watching, not skating, not smiling. But none of it fit cleanly. Nothing connected. As the hours turned into days, the emotional temperature dropped alongside the physical one. Police didn't say it publicly, but by the third day, some began to suspect something darker. An abduction, maybe. A planned one. But how, in plain sight? How could two children be taken from the center of a crowded river festival in the middle of the afternoon, leaving nothing but dead phones and confused memories? Stillwater had seen cold winters before. It had seen accidents, drownings, even crime. But it had never seen something like this. Two siblings skating together in daylight, laughing in the cold, and then simply gone. And no one saw where they went. By dawn on Sunday, Stillwater looked like a crime scene disguised as a postcard. Fresh snowfall masked most of the tracks near the river, but under that shallow layer of powder, patterns remained. Smudged boot prints, dragged sled marks, zigzagging skate lines. Search teams fanned out in every direction. Local firefighters, sheriff's deputies, volunteers, and off-duty EMTs formed grids across the riverside trails and into the tree line. They started close, working outward from where the siblings were last believed to be, and kept eyes low to the ground, scouring for anything: fabric, a glove, a broken branch. The southeast bend of the river became a focal point. It was quieter there, less crowded during the festival. According to cell phone tower data, both Hannah and Nolan's phones last pinged somewhere near that curve, between 4:15 and 4:18 p.m. Then they went silent, together. Cadaver dogs were flown in from Madison. Drones with infrared sensors circled overhead. A local ranger mapped out the terrain, noting that the southeast stretch of the river fed into a shallower runoff, a spot where the ice could grow thinner if not checked regularly. It wasn't officially part of the cleared skating area, but it connected to the main trail, and curious kids could easily wander toward it, especially if the music had faded and the crowd had started to thin. By mid-morning, searchers found a set of footprints, small, side by side, leading toward the bend. They matched Nolan's approximate shoe size. Close by, a second set of deeper tracks, likely Hannah's boots. No signs of struggle, no chaotic scrambling, just a straight path that ended at the lip of the thinning ice. But the ice hadn't broken. Divers were called in from nearby counties. With hand drills and sonar, they probed the ice for weak points, submerged crevices, trapped air pockets. For 3 days, they returned to the same stretch, measuring the current and testing the depth. They found nothing. The ice remained intact, hard and thick. No drag marks, no hole, no sign that anyone or anything had gone in or under. Still, the theories spread faster than the cold. Some believed the kids had gotten disoriented and wandered off into the forest, trying to find a shortcut home. Others clung to the river theory, that the ice had fractured just long enough to swallow them before refreezing. A few whispered what many feared but didn't want to say out loud: someone may have taken them, something deliberate, something fast. No one wanted to believe that could happen here, especially not in the open, with families around, laughter echoing off the trees. The media arrived by Monday afternoon. Satellite trucks parked near the firehouse. Journalists interviewed neighbors, classmates, anyone who had attended the festival. Police began the long process of interviewing every vendor and registered booth operator. More than 40 people were spoken to. Some recalled seeing the kids earlier in the afternoon, Nolan throwing snow into the air, Hannah tying his scarf, but no one could confirm seeing them past 4:30. A few thought they might have seen Hannah near the cocoa tent. Another mentioned a boy sitting on a log near the trailhead, looking downriver. But nothing was definitive. Most memories blurred together. It had been cold. It had been crowded. Faces came and went. What struck investigators was the precision of the silence. 2 kids, 2 phones, 2 sets of footprints, then nothing. No calls to friends, no last selfies, no social media posts, no dropped mittens, no scream, no thud. Just a trail that led toward thinner ice and ended without explanation. By the 4th day, psychological experts were brought in to consult. They studied Hannah and Nolan's habits: independent, careful, not prone to wandering. Hannah was quiet, always watching out for her younger brother. Nolan was curious, yes, but never reckless. Neither had a history of running away. Marcy, their mother, told detectives again and again they would have told her. If something had gone wrong, Hannah would have called. If Nolan had fallen, Hannah wouldn't have left his side. The possibility of foul play began to settle over the investigation like frost, slow, silent, difficult to detect, but spreading. There were too many unanswered questions. If the kids had drowned, where were their skates, their jackets? If they'd walked away, why no prints beyond the river? If someone had taken them, how had they done it without being seen? How could they vanish in the middle of a family festival without a single confirmed witness? Flyers were stapled to telephone poles, distributed in gas stations, mailed out to surrounding counties. Hannah's photo showed a serious girl with pale eyes and long dark hair. Nolan's face was rounder, open, always halfway into a smile. Rewards were offered. Hotlines rang at all hours. Tips came in by the dozen. Most were nothing. Someone saw a girl who looked like Hannah at a Walmart in Eau Claire. A boy matching Nolan's description was reported at a rest stop along I-90. Both were dead ends. Nothing stuck. The mood in Stillwater shifted. What had started as a search turned into a watchful silence. People began locking their doors earlier. Parents kept their kids closer. The river remained frozen, but it no longer felt safe. Patrol cars circled it nightly, even after the search was scaled back. The footprints toward the bend were roped off, documented, photographed, and preserved. But they didn't lead to answers. Only to questions, ones that echoed across the ice long after the snow had covered them again. And still, no one could say where they went after that last step. On the fifth day, as hope thinned with the daylight hours, a man walked into the Stillwater police station carrying a hard drive. His name was Gary Jensen, a semi-retired carpenter who spent winters indulging in his hobby of aerial photography. During the festival, while families skated below, he had flown his drone over the river to capture wide shots of the ice, the people, and the tree line along the southeast bend. He hadn't thought twice about it until news of Hannah and Nolan's disappearance spread. Something tugged at him. He knew he'd captured footage from that exact area, almost to the minute their phones had gone dark. The detectives ushered him into a back office, plugged in the drive, and let the video play. At first, the footage showed nothing unusual. Dozens of small, bundled figures glided across the ice, moving dots of color against the white expanse. Children darted past adults. Groups gathered near the fire pits on the shore. Hannah and Nolan could have been any two of them. Then, around the 4-minute mark, movement caught the detective's eye. Two figures broke from the main group and skated toward the far southeast edge, the area where the ice narrowed near the tree line. One was taller, likely Hannah, steadying the smaller figure. Nolan, as they glided side by side. The timestamp read 4:12 p.m. That was the last known window of their presence, but it wasn't what drew the most attention. In the corner of the frame, further upriver, stood another figure. Unlike the others, this person wasn't skating. He appeared to be standing still, just off the main trail, holding something long and rigid in his hands. At first glance, it resembled a tripod, the kind used by surveyors or photographers. Others thought it looked like a walking stick. The man's clothing blended into the tree line, a parka pulled low, dark pants, boots. The footage never captured his face. He didn't move with the crowd, didn't glance toward the camera, didn't interact with anyone. He simply stood there, watching. Detectives replayed the footage again and again, pausing frame by frame. They circled the blurry silhouette, zoomed in, enhanced the stills, and printed them for distribution. The working theory shifted sharply. If the ice hadn't broken, if the siblings hadn't wandered, then someone else might have been there. Someone unaccounted for. Someone who didn't belong. Investigators immediately asked Jensen if he recognized the figure. He shook his head. He'd been flying his drone from the north bank, and though he noticed groups of kids and families, he hadn't paid attention to one solitary man by the trees. To him, it was just another shape in the snow. The images went out within 24 hours. Local news stations aired them, framing the blurry stills as the potential first real lead. Police canvassed the town again, showing vendors, festival workers, and attendees. Had anyone noticed a man standing alone near the trees that day? Not one person said yes. Dozens recalled skaters, the cocoa stands, the music from the speakers, even the way the ice gleamed in the fading light. But not one remembered a man with a tripod. He was there on film, but not in memory. Rumors spread quickly. In small towns, whispers move faster than facts. Some believed he was a hunter who had wandered too close to the river. Others suggested he was a local surveyor marking land, though no projects were scheduled in that area. Theories grew darker with each retelling. People imagined him as a stranger, waiting, planning, watching children slip away from the crowd. In church basements and diner booths, the question hardened. Had this man been waiting for Hannah and Nolan, or had his presence been nothing more than coincidence? A harmless bystander swallowed into suspicion by circumstance? The uncertainty fed anxiety. Parents who had once allowed their children to roam the ice now held them back. Neighbors side-eyed anyone they didn't recognize. The small town, once unified in grief, began to fracture into suspicion. Police issued a public appeal, asking the man to come forward, reassuring the community that he might be innocent, that his perspective could help. No one answered. No one claimed to know him. Calls poured into the hotline, false identifications, mistaken guesses, and the occasional crank claiming responsibility. Detectives tracked each lead, but every door they knocked on ended the same way. Not him. In the absence of answers, the image itself took on a life of its own. The blurry silhouette on the riverbank became a kind of ghost, present but unknowable, tied to the siblings' last confirmed movements and yet resistant to explanation. Weeks passed. The case files grew thicker, but the figure in the footage remained just that, a shadow holding something long and rigid, standing motionless while two children skated toward the tree line, never to return. And with each passing day, the silence of the river seemed to grow heavier, as if holding on to something no one else could see. On the fourth day, when fatigue weighed on every volunteer and the biting cold turned breath into fog, the search seemed to stall. Teams had combed the forests, interrogated every vendor, replayed the drone footage 100 times. Leads evaporated. Then, late that afternoon, a patrol helicopter traced the southern bend of the Stillwater River and spotted something unusual. Through the frozen canopy of ice, a dark patch had formed, an uneven circle, black against the blue-white surface. It wasn't wide, no more than a few feet across, but it stood out like a wound in the frozen skin of the river. Pilots marked the coordinates and radioed ground crews. By dusk, the area was sealed off. The troubling detail was this: no one had logged a break there earlier. The ice in that section had been tested before the festival. Photographs from opening day showed it solid and unblemished. Yet now, 4 days after Hannah and Nolan vanished, there it was, a hole. Search leaders debated whether it had formed naturally, but temperatures had been steady, the ice thick. This wasn't thaw. It looked like something had punctured through. Divers arrived before dawn the next morning. The hole was carefully widened, sonar deployed, lights cast beneath the ice's surface. One by one, divers descended into the black water. The current near the bend split into two directions, one slow and muddy, the other sharp and fast, pushing north. They followed both, hands dragging along silt and debris. For hours they searched. When they resurfaced, the news was crushing. No bodies, no clothing, nothing directly tied to Hannah or Nolan. Instead, what they retrieved muddied the case even further. From the muck came an abandoned ice fishing bucket, rusted through at the bottom. Several crushed cans, beer bottles long frozen in layers of silt, a tangled mess of fishing line and hooks, ordinary river trash. But then a single child's glove, small, blue, with faded fabric. It was waterlogged, impossible to date. Marcy insisted it looked like one of Nolan's, part of the pair she'd sent him out with, but without distinctive markings, there was no confirmation. The glove was logged into evidence, photographed, sealed, and set aside as possible. It was all investigators had, and it wasn't nearly enough. Theories fractured instantly. Some investigators believed this was the breakthrough, the simple explanation. The siblings had wandered too far south, the ice had given way, and they'd slipped beneath. In that version, the glove was proof. They'd been lost to the river, but others pointed out glaring inconsistencies. The hole hadn't existed on day one. If the children had fallen through, why hadn't searchers noticed immediately? And why hadn't their bodies or skates turned up in the controlled sweep? The river current was strong, yes, but not infinite. If they'd gone in, something should have surfaced downstream. Then came another possibility, darker and more deliberate. What if the hole had been created after the fact, punched through to stage a misdirection, to redirect suspicion back onto the ice theory? It wasn't far-fetched. The dark patch had appeared suddenly, days into the search. Anyone could have broken it open overnight. A heavy tool, an auger, even deliberate vandalism, it was possible. In that telling, the glove wasn't evidence of drowning, but a planted decoy. Something left behind to quiet the search, to give investigators a convenient answer. The more experts debated, the more the investigation splintered. Forensic hydrologists mapped the split in the current. One branch ran fast, capable of pulling a body miles downstream in days. The other was sluggish, choked with reeds and fallen branches, creating pockets where evidence might remain trapped indefinitely. Each scenario had precedent, but neither had proof. Search crews swept miles of shoreline along both branches, dragging hooks, deploying sonar, pulling up mud and stone. Nothing connected to Hannah or Nolan was recovered. Frustration began to mount, not just within the police department but throughout the community. After the release of the drone footage showing the mysterious man near the tree line, many expected answers. Instead, they now faced contradictory evidence. Was this a case of children lost to natural dangers or something orchestrated by human hands? Each possibility divided the town further. One side clung to the ice, the comfort of an accident, a tragic but explainable ending. The other leaned toward abduction, a calculated act hiding behind the randomness of nature. Marcy couldn't accept either. She knew her children. She replayed every scenario in her head. If the ice had cracked, Hannah would have screamed. Someone would have heard. If they'd wandered into the woods, tracks would have led further. If they'd been taken, how could it have happened without a single witness? The hole offered no closure, only a deeper fracture in the story. By the end of that week, the official report was sterile. Unidentified anomaly in ice, items recovered inconclusive, no remains. Unofficially, whispers returned. Neighbors asked why the hole appeared late. Some believed a hunter had found the children and hidden them beneath. Others suggested the glove belonged to neither of them, just another red herring from the river. Everyone agreed on one thing. The river seemed to be holding its secrets close. And yet, the hole in the ice stood as a symbol of the case itself, something that shouldn't have been there, something impossible to ignore, and something that gave no real answers. It left investigators staring into black water, asking themselves which possibility they feared more, that Hannah and Nolan had slipped silently beneath the ice, or that someone else had put them there. By the seventh day, the river no longer felt like the only answer. Searchers had dragged, dived, scanned, and scoured every visible stretch of ice. Theories about drowning no longer satisfied those who knew the still water best. That's when an older woman named Ruth Callahan stepped into the investigation. She wasn't law enforcement, not anymore. She had spent 30 years as a tracker with the state's Department of Natural Resources before retiring to a cabin just outside of town. She'd seen what rivers could do, what snow concealed, what people missed, and she didn't buy the idea that both children had slipped beneath the ice without a trace. She believed if answers existed, they might be hiding in the woods. Ruth joined the volunteers walking the periphery. Unlike many, she didn't look for obvious clues. Her eyes were trained for patterns, disturbances most wouldn't notice. On the 8th morning, moving slowly along the riverbank southeast of the bend, she saw something. To most, it would have looked like nothing more than uneven snow crust, half-frozen ridges, half hidden beneath a dusting of new flakes. But Ruth knelt and brushed the surface with her gloved hand. Beneath, she found lines, parallel, side by side, running from the edge of the bank toward the forest interior. Not footprints, drag marks. The sight chilled her. She followed them as far as she could before they disappeared into a thicket where snow had hardened. She flagged down deputies who cordoned off the stretch and called in forensics. Under the sun, with teams examining the frozen lines, the reality set in. Someone, or something, had been dragged from the riverbank into the woods. The width and spacing suggested human-sized weight, not an animal, not a sled. 2 impressions, possibly 2 bodies. The area was carefully swabbed, but conditions worked against the investigators. A week of snow and sub-zero temperatures had degraded any potential DNA. Samples were collected and sent to the lab anyway. Nothing conclusive came back. Still, cadaver dogs were walked over the ground, several alerted along the drag path, noses jerking, tails stiff, but no remains surfaced. The trail ended abruptly, as though whoever had made it vanished deeper into the trees, covering their tracks or slipping into terrain the snow refused to yield. For investigators, the discovery cracked the case wide open. Until now, the leading theory remained the river. But these marks suggested something else, something deliberate. If the siblings had drowned, they wouldn't have ended up dragged inland. If they'd wandered, their feet would have left prints, not parallel troughs. The marks painted a new story, someone moving weight from the ice toward concealment, the family was told, and with that news came a shift in tone. Abduction, once a whispered fear, now became a dominant possibility. News outlets seized on it instantly. Headlines read, "Drag marks suggest foul play," and Stillwater mystery deepens. For the community, it was both a revelation and a nightmare. The river could be explained. Accidents happen, but drag marks, those meant intent. Police expanded their focus, re-interviewing festival attendees with a sharper edge. Did anyone see someone carrying or pulling something unusual? Did anyone notice a sled, a toboggan, or a bundled shape being moved? The answers stayed the same. No. No one remembered. The man from the drone footage with the possible tripod was brought up again. What if it hadn't been a tripod? What if it had been something to haul weight across ice? The idea took root. Ruth herself gave quiet interviews, careful not to speculate. She only said what she knew. Those marks weren't natural. They belonged to someone moving something heavy. Beyond that, she couldn't say. Forensics reinforced her observation. The impressions were consistent with parallel drag patterns, not animal tracks or random snow shift. But with no usable DNA, the evidence couldn't hold weight in court. It became another anomaly, compelling, chilling, but unconfirmed. Frustration seeped into the investigation. Detectives argued over resources. Do they double back to the river, push deeper into the forest, bring in thermal drones to sweep acres of snow-covered ground? Each option cost money, and by now the search had already strained county funds. Volunteers kept coming, but their numbers thinned as the cold dragged on. Some feared they were now looking for bodies, not children. Others feared they'd never find either. The Taylor family endured each new development with breaking hearts. To be told their children had drowned was agony, but at least it was a picture they could understand. Now, to be told they may have been taken, pulled from the riverbank into the woods, was worse. It meant someone had chosen them. It meant intent. It meant Stillwater wasn't safe in the way it used to be. Theories multiplied. Some said the drag marks were old, predating the festival, made by hunters hauling game. Others dismissed them as frost damage, natural shifting mistaken for something sinister. But the dog's reaction gnawed at the town. Animals don't invent stories. They smell what they smell. And that left a question no one wanted to voice, but everyone carried. Had Hannah and Nolan been alive when they were pulled into the trees, or had the river already claimed them first? The woods, quiet and indifferent, refused to give an answer. 2 weeks after Hannah and Nolan vanished, when the search had shifted from urgency to endurance, a new lead surfaced that pulled the case in yet another direction. It came from an offhand remark, the kind investigators often jot down but rarely expect to matter. A local groundskeeper told deputies he'd seen a van the night of the festival, not on the river itself, but along a narrow service road that cut behind the Stillwater Veterinary Clinic, just a half-mile from the southeast bend. He remembered it because it was idling there long after the crowd had gone home, headlights off, exhaust curling in the frozen air. At first, the tip seemed thin. Plenty of vehicles had been near the festival. But when detectives checked with the clinic, they discovered 2 external security cameras mounted on the building. Both pointed toward the service road. The footage was pulled. What it revealed was enough to freeze the room. At 5:22 p.m., a white cargo van rolled into frame. It slowed, then stopped. The driver never stepped out, never approached the clinic. Instead, the vehicle sat idling for 10 long minutes. At one point, the driver leaned forward as though adjusting something on the dash. Then the van reversed slightly, repositioned, and settled again. The camera's resolution wasn't sharp enough to catch a license plate. Snow and shadow obscured the side panels. All that could be seen clearly was the silhouette of a man in the driver's seat, bulky in a winter parka and a knit hat pulled low. His face stayed turned away from the lens. Then, just after 5:32, the van pulled out of frame, heading south, away from the river, away from town. Investigators sat with the tape for hours. They looped it, slowed it, tried enhancements. The reality was crushing. They had a vehicle, a potential suspect, but no identifiers. Worse, by the time the footage surfaced, 2 full weeks had passed. Any tire impressions on the snowy road were long gone. Weather had erased them. No one at the clinic recalled seeing the van that night. No staff members worked late. No clients had scheduled after-hours visits. Still, the discovery shifted the investigation again. A vehicle idling so close to where the siblings vanished, so close to the stretch of river where their phones had last pinged, couldn't be ignored. The theory forming now was abduction by car. Someone waits, watches the festival thin, isolates 2 children near the bend, and then uses a vehicle to disappear. The van fit perfectly into that narrative. Images were circulated to state law enforcement networks. Still frames were extracted, grainy shots of the vehicle's shape, the faint outline of its driver. Bulletins went out across county lines. Local stations aired them with urgent headlines. White vans became objects of suspicion overnight. In Stillwater, parents whispered warnings. Children pointed when one drove past. Mechanics fielded calls from nervous owners asking if their own vans could be mistaken for the one in the footage. But no match came back. No one reported the van as missing or stolen. No resident stepped forward to admit they had been the driver. The longer it dragged on, the more helpless the investigation felt. Leads fizzled. Calls poured into hotlines, most of them useless. Every blurry sighting of a white van on a highway sparked a new thread that ended in nothing. Detectives followed each, but the result was always the same. Wrong van, wrong driver, dead end. For Marcy, the children's mother, the footage was both a lifeline and a torment. Finally, something tangible, a shape, a presence, a possible explanation, but also another faceless ghost, impossible to identify, impossible to hold accountable. She stared at the stills until she memorized every line of shadow, convinced it meant something more than what police could see. She asked the same question over and over. If that man wasn't involved, why was he parked there? What reason did he have to idle on a deserted service road while children were vanishing less than a mile away? The answer never came. Instead, bureaucratic delays began to grind the investigation down. Requests for higher resolution analysis took weeks. Cross-state distribution of the images bogged down in paperwork. Federal agencies offered consultation but little direct involvement. Meanwhile, time kept slipping. Whatever evidence had existed on that road had long since melted away. The van footage became another haunting piece of the puzzle, compelling, chilling, and incomplete. Like the drone's shadowy figure and the drag marks in the snow, it hinted at foul play but refused to deliver proof. It left investigators staring at a silhouette and a clock, knowing both were running out. And with each day that passed, Stillwater's hope thinned, replaced instead with the creeping realization that the truth was slipping further from reach. By the time March arrived, the Stillwater River had begun to thaw. 3 months of searching had turned from frantic to procedural, and the crowds of volunteers were mostly gone. Only Corps investigators and a handful of locals kept walking the banks, eyes scanning for anything the ice might release. Then, a sudden development pulled the case back into headlines. It didn't come from the river or the woods. It came from a county jail cell. A 34-year-old man named Daniel Mercer had been picked up on burglary charges in a neighboring town. He was known to police, a repeat offender with a long history of drug problems and small-time crimes. During questioning, Mercer claimed he had information about Hannah and Nolan. He said he'd been at the festival the night they vanished. More than that, he claimed he'd seen them. According to his statement, sometime around dusk, he had walked along the river near an inlet south of the main skating area. There, he said, he spotted the siblings near the edge of the ice. Moments later, he heard what he described as screaming under the ice, as though someone had fallen through and was trapped beneath. He claimed he panicked, left the area, and never told anyone. When detectives pressed him on why he stayed silent for months, Mercer muttered something about being scared, about no one believing him. But what he offered next jolted investigators. He drew a crude map marking an inlet just half a mile downstream from the last known location of the children's phones. The possibility was too close to ignore. Divers were called in again. Boats and sonar equipment were deployed, this time focusing precisely on the spot Mercer had identified. For days they searched the inlet, cutting through shifting ice and dragging the silt-heavy bottom. Every stick, every rock was inspected, but the result was the same as before. Nothing. No bodies, no clothing, no trace of Hannah or Nolan. The inlet yielded nothing but mud and disappointment. As hours stretched into days, doubts grew. Detectives began reviewing Mercer's story more critically. His timeline didn't align with known facts. Witnesses didn't place him at the festival. His description of the siblings' clothing didn't match what they had been wearing. And the most damning detail, phone records proved he hadn't been anywhere near Stillwater that evening. When confronted, Mercer cracked. He admitted he'd made the story up. His motive was simple. He thought cooperation might earn him leniency on his charges. In exchange for a lighter sentence, he'd inserted himself into the town's greatest tragedy. The revelation landed like a gut punch. For weeks, hope had flickered again. Investigators had allowed themselves to believe, maybe, finally, a witness had come forward. Instead, it was a lie. Another dead end in a case built on them. The media seized on the turn. What had been reported as a breakthrough quickly unraveled into embarrassment. Headlines screamed about false confession in Stillwater mystery. Commentators questioned why investigators had wasted resources on the word of a convicted criminal. Public trust in the investigation began to erode. Online forums, already buzzing with conspiracy theories, turned hostile. Some accused the police of incompetence, chasing shadows instead of suspects. Others turned on the family. The internet can be cruel in ways that bleed into real life. Strangers who had never met Hannah or Nolan dissected their parents' interviews frame by frame. They judged facial expressions, tone, and body language. Some claimed Marcy had shown too little emotion. Others suggested the father, who had been quieter in the media, was hiding something. Amateur sleuths speculated endlessly, and the narrative twisted. In the absence of answers, the victim's own family became the focus of suspicion. Inside the Taylor household, the strain was unbearable. What had once been a home filled with warmth and laughter had become a shell of silence. Marcy stopped giving interviews. She avoided the grocery store, where whispers followed her down aisles. Friends drifted away, unsure what to say, fearful of the attention. The family's grief was compounded by blame they didn't deserve, suspicion they couldn't erase. Detectives felt the shift too. Leads dried up, tips slowed. The case that had once mobilized an entire town now faced fatigue and cynicism. For every person still hoping for answers, another had resigned to the idea that the siblings were gone forever, swallowed by ice or river, and that chasing theories was futile. The Mercer confession, its rise and collapse, had stolen momentum. Worse, it had inflicted new wounds on a family already buried under loss. In the months that followed, the case would not recover its early urgency. The siblings remained missing. The drone figure remained unidentified. The van untraced, the drag marks unexplained. What the false confession left behind was not evidence, but disillusionment. A sense that every path, no matter how promising, would end the same way. Empty. And as the river thawed into spring, the silence grew heavier, as though Stillwater itself had decided not to speak anymore. The first winter without Hannah and Nolan came quickly. Snow fell heavier than usual, blanketing the Stillwater in silence. Search parties dwindled, replaced instead by vigils. Families gathered with candles near the southeast bend, voices trembling as they sang carols into the cold night. A wooden bench was installed by Spring, engraved with their names, facing the river as though waiting for them to return. At first, the community sat there often, parents, classmates, strangers. But with each passing year, fewer came. The candles burned smaller, the vigils shorter. The river kept freezing and thawing, indifferent to what it had swallowed or hidden. 13 winters passed in that cycle. Each year, when the river hardened again, people whispered the same questions. Had the children gone under? Had someone taken them? Had the figure with the tripod been more than coincidence? Time didn't erase those questions, it sharpened them into folklore. Children growing up in Stillwater heard warnings not to wander near the bend, told in hushed tones by parents who never forgot that day. In bars and church halls, locals referred to the mystery simply as the river. Everyone knew what it meant. For the Taylor family, time didn't heal. It only stretched the wound further. After the first few years, Marcy couldn't bear the constant reminders. She packed up and moved 2 counties over. Some said she needed distance. Others whispered that she was running from suspicion still lingering online. The truth was simpler. She couldn't drive past the bench with her children's names and not fall apart. The father left quietly too, though separately. Whatever bound them fractured under the weight of grief and public scrutiny. By the 5th year, the Taylor home had been sold, its walls stripped of photographs. New owners moved in, never speaking of who had lived there before. The case became what investigators call cold. Files sat in storage, only pulled when a tip came in, but most tips led nowhere. Every few years, a new detective took a fresh look. Each time, they circled back to the same evidence: the drone footage with the unknown figure, the drag marks, the van, the glove. Each piece haunting, suggestive, but never conclusive. Leads dried before they could be tested. Witnesses grew older, their memories blurred. The case shifted from active investigation to regional legend. 7 years after the disappearance, a strange development jolted the file open again. A second-hand shop in a nearby town listed a children's backpack for sale. A local mother recognized the name stitched faintly inside: Nolan. She called police immediately. The bag was retrieved, examined, and confirmed. It had belonged to him. Marcy had described it in the original reports: navy blue with frayed straps and a patch near the zipper. But where it had been all that time, no one knew. Detectives pressed the shop owner for answers. Who brought it in? When had it arrived? The man shrugged helplessly. His store cycled through donations constantly. Items came from boxes left at the door, piles dropped off anonymously. He couldn't say whether the bag had been in circulation for weeks or years. The register held no record, no receipt, nothing traceable. Once again, investigators had something tangible in their hands, proof that at least one of the siblings' belongings had resurfaced, but no way to follow the trail back to its source. The backpack only deepened the mystery. If Nolan had drowned, how did his bag end up in a store miles away years later? If it had been planted, who wanted it found? Some saw it as confirmation of abduction, others dismissed it as coincidence, the result of a misplaced item scavenged and recycled. No clear answers emerged. The case remained frozen. And yet the people of Stillwater never forgot. Even as vigils shrank, conversations carried on. Neighbors repeated the same detail: the figure caught on the drone, standing near the trees, holding something long. The man with the tripod, they called him now, though no one knew for sure what he carried. His silhouette became part of the town's folklore, a shadow invoked whenever another child strayed too far on the river ice. Parents lowered their voices when mentioning him, as if to do otherwise might summon him back. Each thaw brought fresh speculation. Some hoped the river would finally give something up: a jacket, a bone, a sign. Others feared it never would, that the Stillwater held its silence too tightly. The seasons kept moving, relentless, while the truth stood still. And in the quiet years, the story grew less like an open investigation and more like an echo, a reminder that something had happened here, something no one could explain, something that perhaps someone still out there knew and had chosen not to tell. 13 years after Hannah and Nolan vanished, the Stillwater River finally shifted. It was March, the tail end of winter, when temperatures spiked without warning. Ice that normally lingered into April began to fracture, cracking under unseasonal warmth. The river swelled, its current stronger, breaking through banks and flooding nearby reeds. On a gray morning, a fisherman named Carl Jensen pushed his small boat into the North Channel, hoping to take advantage of the thaw. What he found there would undo years of silence. Near the bank where cattails bent under melting ice, something metallic caught his eye. At first he thought it was scrap tangled in reeds, Pulling closer, he reached with his gaff and snagged it. What he dragged onto the boat floor stopped him cold. It was half of a skate blade, corroded and bent, wrapped in a strip of decayed cloth. The sight churned his stomach. He knew the story. Everyone in Stillwater did. This wasn't junk. It was history resurfacing. He called authorities immediately. Within hours, divers were back on the river. The location was cordoned off, news cameras kept at a distance. Under the shifting current, more pieces emerged. A torn fragment of what had once been a child's winter coat, faded but recognizable as red beneath layers of silt. A bracelet, small, metal, tarnished but legible. The inscription read one word: Nolan. When the evidence was laid out on blue tarps at the staging site, silence swept through the crews. For the first time in 13 years, something tangible, undeniable, had surfaced. This wasn't rumor, not misdirection, not theory. These were the siblings' belongings, wrenched from the river itself. Days later, forensic analysis confirmed the weight of the discovery. Among the debris were small bone fragments, badly degraded but still viable for testing. The results came back: a partial match to Nolan Taylor. Not enough to reconstruct his story, but enough to declare with certainty that at least part of him had been recovered. For Hannah, there was nothing. No bones, no belongings, no trace. The news spread like wildfire. For some, it was closure, proof that Nolan had indeed been lost to the river. For others, it was unbearable. The confirmation of one child's fate only widened the question of the other. Why him, but not her? Why a bracelet with his name, but no sign of his sister? For Marcy, the discovery shattered the fragile peace she had built. She had learned to survive in absence, to live without knowing. Now, knowing only part of the truth was worse. She wept when investigators handed her the bracelet, but refused to speak to the media. Friends said she held it like a lifeline, refusing to let it out of her sight. The object had outlasted her son, carried downriver for over a decade, waiting to be found. Yet amid the heartbreak, the river offered something stranger. In the reeds alongside the fragments of cloth and bone, divers pulled out a rectangular object encrusted in mud. At first it looked like debris from an old tackle box. When rinsed, it revealed buttons, a small lens, a cracked screen. A handheld video camera, the kind popular in the early 2000s, water-damaged but intact enough to recognize. The presence of the camera opened a new vein of speculation. Whose was it? How had it ended up in the same pocket of reeds as Nolan's belongings? And most disturbing of all, what might still be on it? Forensics worked carefully, drying and disassembling the device. It was old, corroded, but recoverable. Bits of data clung to its ruined memory card, fragments of video and sound. Investigators kept details quiet at first, not ready to fuel rumor without certainty. But word leaked quickly, as it always does. Suddenly, townspeople weren't just talking about the skate blade or the bracelet. They were whispering about a camera, one that might hold the last images of Hannah and Nolan alive. The discovery reignited interest in the case, but also reopened old wounds. News crews returned to Stillwater. National outlets replayed images of the bench by the bend, the faded flyers, the drone footage of the unknown man. Candlelight vigils swelled briefly again, larger than they had been in years. But this time, the gatherings weren't filled with hope. They were heavy with dread. People wanted to believe the camera might offer clarity. Deep down, they feared what it might actually show. Investigators faced their own torment. Evidence finally existed, but it didn't fit neatly into any theory. If Nolan had drowned, how had his belongings ended up miles downstream, tangled with an old camera? If someone had staged it, why wait 13 years? And where was Hannah? If she had been taken, had the river claimed only her brother? Or had both gone in, with the current scattering their fates in different directions? Theories divided again. The ice believers felt vindicated. Nolan had been pulled under. The abduction believers clung to the camera, insisting its presence proved someone else had been involved. Once more, the town split into camps, each certain of their own version, each accusing the other of ignoring the truth. For the Taylor family, there was no such luxury. The bracelet and the bones proved what they had always feared. At least one child was gone. But the camera, its silent, damaged frame, suggested that somewhere within its memory, the river might still be holding a secret. For months after the discovery, the handheld camera sat in a forensic lab, its casing pried open, its memory card painstakingly dried and stabilized. Specialists warned the family and investigators not to expect much. Water and time had degraded the device beyond repair in most places. 13 winters in a river rarely left anything intact. And yet, against the odds, fragments survived. 3 clips, damaged, distorted, but still viewable, were eventually pulled from the card. The first clip was short, no more than a minute long. It showed 2 children standing along the Stillwater's riverbank, bundled in heavy coats and scarves. Hannah's face was turned away, Nolan's half obscured by the lens, but the laughter was unmistakable. They were joking with each other, voices rising above the muffled crunch of ice beneath boots. The camera shook in the unsteady hands of whoever held it, moving in and out of focus. Background noise suggested it was late afternoon. The wind was sharper, the light low. It was the last clear image of the siblings alive. The second clip shifted abruptly. The screen jolted as though the camera had been grabbed or moved quickly. Trees blurred past. The sound was jagged, punctuated by gasps and rapid footsteps. For moments, the frame caught only sky and branches, disorienting and chaotic. Then, faintly, a voice broke through. A man's voice, low and controlled, telling the children to stay calm. The words repeated twice, deliberate and steady, not panicked. Audio technicians later confirmed it was not their father's voice. The man was unknown. The third and final clip was the hardest to watch. At first, the camera pointed downward, showing what appeared to be snow and ice sliding past as if the lens were being dragged. Then, the image turned, facing what seemed to be a dark hollow. The frame filled with shifting blackness and slivers of light. For a brief moment, it captured a surface, solid, white, with the unmistakable texture of ice from below. The last seconds were nothing but static. The card cut off, corrupted beyond recovery. When investigators reviewed the footage, the room fell silent. After 13 years, the river had given up proof that the siblings hadn't simply vanished on their own. They had been with someone else, someone close enough to film them laughing, close enough to issue commands, close enough to silence them without witnesses. It wasn't an accident preserved on tape. It was an encounter. Police circulated the recovered voice across state databases, running it through voice recognition software, comparing it to known offenders. They played it for locals, festival workers, even family acquaintances. No match was found. The man's identity remained hidden. Every lead, once again, ended in silence. For the public, the footage reignited the mystery with new intensity. News outlets replayed the blurred images and audio endlessly. Online forums dissected each frame, speculating on who held the camera, what the final shot of ice meant. Some claimed the children had been trapped beneath the surface. Others believed the camera had been hidden deliberately, left for discovery years later as a taunt. Theories multiplied faster than facts. For Marcy, it was a wound she could hardly bear. Seeing her children laugh on video just minutes before whatever happened next broke her all over again. Hearing a strange man's voice, speaking calmly, almost gently, made her skin crawl. It confirmed what she had feared but never proved. Someone had been with them, someone who had taken control. But the footage offered no face, no name, no ending, only fragments. Investigators archived the clips, preserving them as the most critical evidence in the case. They could not be released in full to the public for fear of contaminating future leads. Still, the whispers spread. Everyone had an opinion on who the man was. Some swore it matched a drifter who'd passed through years earlier. Others insisted it was someone local, someone who had blended into the crowd that day. Without confirmation, suspicion became paranoia. And Hannah, her absence was louder than ever. Nolan's bracelet, Nolan's bones, Nolan's voice caught faintly on tape, but no trace of his sister. Some clung to the belief she might still be alive, taken, but hidden. Others believed the river had claimed her differently, her remains simply never found. The camera held her laughter, but not her fate. 13 years had passed since two children skated away from their mother and never returned. The thaw had given back a blade, a bracelet, fragments of bone, and a camera. Enough to prove something terrible had happened, not enough to answer who, why, or how. In the end, the Stillwater kept its silence. It had revealed pieces, but not peace.